Good morning. Good to go? Perfect. Thank you. Good morning and welcome to all of you. We're going to start the session on pioneering NBS, nature-based solutions for resilient infrastructure. We have two parts to this session today. We're going to have a conversation from my colleague Ria on infrastructure governance and pathways which include NBS. And we're going to have a very distinguished panel talking about nature-based solutions and infrastructure. Over to you, Ria.
Thank you, Tanaji, for that introduction. A warm welcome to all of you present here in person and virtually. To mention the white paper, infrastructure governance of infrastructure for resilience has been developed by CDRI in partnership with Resilient Shift, and drawing on case studies and stakeholder engagements with infrastructure decision makers and practitioners across the globe. The white paper explores challenges, barriers, and also key positive opportunities for implementing governance of infrastructure for resilience. I would like to take this opportunity to thank my fellow colleagues at Resilient Shift and Arup in contributing for developing this paper, and we look forward to further opportunities and collaborations for taking forward the agenda of resilient infrastructure. As we emerge from the pandemic and work towards decarbonizing our infrastructure systems, significant investments have been planned for the coming years. But with the complex and interdependent nature of infrastructure systems, fragmented governance make them extremely vulnerable and fragile to extreme events and long-term climate change impacts. Infrastructure disruptions impose a cost on the economy, and it is important that the cost of resilience be factored into the planning and design of infrastructure systems. Poor governance is a key factor that has led to infrastructure projects failing to meet their resilience and societal objectives. Developing infrastructure that is resilient to climate change and natural hazards require resilience thinking, resilience decision-making, and resilient actions by practitioners across the whole infrastructure life cycle. At each stage of the infrastructure life cycle, there are opportunities to enhance the resilience value of an infrastructure project. This white paper highlights the role good governance can play in integrating resilience through 7 key themes, which are prioritizing the infrastructure needs in the beginning of the cycle, a whole systems approach, adaptive capacities, prioritizing on infrastructure financing, regulation, codes and standards, capacity and resourcing, and lastly, data, information and technology. The governance challenges and opportunities around integrating nature-based solutions into traditional decision-making for infrastructure investments have also been highlighted and explored in the tenets of this white paper around the 7 themes developed for this white paper. While nature-based solutions are gaining traction as a comprehensive strategy for promoting adaptation and resilience, also for reducing trade-offs and promoting synergies among SDGs, there are a few pertinent challenges that actually impede the large-scale adoption of nature-based solutions. A few of the challenges have been explored in this white paper, and they have emerged from the various discussions we've had with mostly the decision makers and policy makers at the government levels. Nature-based solutions typically span across large landscapes and seascapes, which cut across several jurisdiction lines. For NBS governance to be successful, there is a need for active cooperation and coordinated action across stakeholders whose goals or interests may not coincide, for that matter might even conflict. Another challenge that impedes the adoption of nature-based solutions are incentives and laws that are usually unsupportive, or for that matter might even be contradictory, which prevents further adoption of nature-based solutions. Existing legal frameworks such as land use rights, environmental and building permit schemes sometimes conflict the environmental management demands and acts as a barrier for implementing nature-based solutions. A large part of the problem is the benefits associated with nature-based solutions generally cannot be capitalized by a single party or an organization. They create externalities that impact on many different groups, resulting in a problem of ownerships. For NBS to have the right kind of financing, there is a need and a provision for an appropriate risk-sharing arrangements for decision-making. Despite climate threats being recognized globally and the threats posed by climate change impacts, only less than 5% of climate finance actually goes into addressing the climate impacts. And less than 1% of this 5% goes into coastal protection, infrastructure, and disaster risk management, which includes nature-based solutions. The short-term nature of public and private decision-making hinders the long-term planning and maintenance required for sustaining the nature-based solutions benefits. Also, the lack of capacity development, existing knowledge building is a challenge to a widespread adoption of nature-based solutions. Decision makers usually resort to the comfort zone of adopting solutions which they are already familiar with, which is a strong obstacle in adopting nature-based solutions on a wider scale. Challenge with respect to data. While new approaches and studies have been developed to quantify and assess risks, risk reduction benefits in nature-based solution, but finding the right data, especially in environments with poor data management, again impedes the adoption of nature-based solutions. While these challenges have emerged through this white paper, we have tried to see a hopeful future for nature-based solutions. While these pertinent challenges exist, there is a hope for a positive change for pioneering nature-based solutions for climate-resilient infrastructure. Through this white paper, we have paved way for a five-pronged approach which can be leveraged on in promoting nature-based solutions for resilient infrastructure. The first one being ensuring that nature-based solution is implemented in a more holistic and comprehensive manner. Ensuring collective action is achieved by ensuring the inclusion of government, investors, owners, private sector, especially the local community and indigenous people. We have to ensure they're consulted and involved as active contributors at all stages for insightful methods for implementing NBS on ground. Then authorizing and enabling nature-based solution and allowing regulatory flexibility to help create an enabling environment to integrate nature-based solutions into disaster risk management and development planning. Overcoming the obstacles of capacity and knowledge management by introducing robust institutions and established planning structures that ensure the benefits of nature-based solutions across landscapes and seascapes are introduced. An important factor is to ensure the investment nature-based solution to recognize that it relates to human, social, and nature capital and not just material and financial capital. So the scope of value offer for the integration of nature-based solution needs to include an emphasis on environmental, social, and economic benefits. Lastly, forging partnerships between companies, communities, local governments, national governments, financial institutions was extremely critical to the provision of large-scale, long-term investments in nature-based solutions. While a nature-based solution poses significant challenges and opportunities at every stage of the life cycle, there is definitely a need for more open-ended and non-linear governance structures. With this, I look forward to hearing the insight of all the panelists we have for the next section of the session. And to release the mark of this white paper, we have a small video which we have developed on governance of infrastructure for resilience, and we will screen it here now. And that is all from my end, and I look forward to the insightful discussion. Thank you.
At Van Oord, we're proud to be able to deliver solutions that protect people from the dangers of sea level rise and at the same time maximise the benefits for local communities, nature and economies. One example is the Honsbosch and Petter
Video played later. It's my pleasure to have our panelists here this morning. I am Tanaji Sen. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Partnership at CDRI. I have with us here today Mr. Chet Schulz, CEO, Resilient Shift, Emily Pigeon from Conservation International, Unikrishnan Nair from Commonwealth Secretariat, and Sven Kramer for Van Orth. This session will have 4 short opening remarks and will be followed by 2 structured rounds of questions, and we will have a last round of open questions from the audience, both virtually and in person. I now take the opportunity to invite Seth to discuss his opening remarks. He's the CEO of Resilient Shift. Thank you. Over to you.
That should do it. But first, before I do that, a big thank you for all of you coming here, especially in the Resilience Hub. Resilient Shift is one of the 3 founding partners that pulled this together. It's the first time in the history of COP there has been a home and a hub for resilience, which we're incredibly proud of. So thank you for coming. And also a big thanks to the partners on this white paper. It's really, really kind of exciting. It's a growing area of interest and import, and I think this is a continuation of a very important conversation. I'm going to keep my remarks pretty short because I like the Q&A and want to talk with all of you. I wanted to zoom in for a minute on the key takeaways that we just heard an overview of and what I think we need to do to help progress them. So, as we just heard, the first one is mainstreaming nature-based solutions into policies with international and/or continental priorities. So they have to get specific, and they have to get very contextualized in where they're at. In order to kind of protect, preserve, and/or the restoration of the natural environment, it needs to be central into these international agreements, but then contextualized very specifically. They have to also be part of the implementation processes that we're seeing in the NDCs, which I'll talk about a little bit more. But importantly, there needs to be a much greater linkage between the different layers of government, so national to regional to local. And some of the work that needs to be done is understanding the vertical integration of policy that does or doesn't exist in different countries. Because what you'll find by looking through this is that there are different strengths and weaknesses depending on the country that you're in between those 3. And if you don't integrate that vertically, it's not going to have the outcome that you want. And in particular, just a couple examples of these, and I'm sure everybody loves the acronym soup at being with COP and all the organizations, but just as a few of where these recommendations need to start appearing is in the Sustainable Development Goals, the nationally determined contributions, or the NDCs, which is what we're focusing on here at COP26, national adaptation plans, the Convention for Biological Diversity, national biodiversity strategies, and action plans. So as again, we're pivoting from what was an agreement for 1.5, we're now moving into implementation. We need to know how to do this, and these things need to get much more tactical and start appearing in these implementation plans. Of note, which is quite interesting, the research revealed that 2/3 of the signatories in the Paris Agreement include nature-based solution in some form of adaptation or mitigation objectives. However, only 17% of them have quantifiable or robust targets. So great that it's getting mentioned, not great that it's not being specific on what we need to do. Number 2, we need to understand the climate vulnerabilities and interdependencies of the natural environment and existing infrastructure assets. So part of this is not just what we need to do moving forward in a transformative way, which is absolutely the case, but understand the context of the existing, outdated, or unfit infrastructure, and how what we move forward in nature-based solutions not only provides the new services we need it to, but also helps protect and shore up some of the old and aging infrastructure, because we don't have enough time to do one and not the other. Governments should also upskill and understand how nature-based solutions can address the different climate change hazards in the policies that they're doing. And one way to do this is to understand, of course, the vulnerabilities from climate and ecosystems and biodiversities in the regions using scientific evidence. And I don't know about you, but a lot of the commentary and discussions, aptly so, around COP this week, everybody's talking about the digital transformation, the exuberance of information and data that we have, which I would not argue with. That is true. The problem is it isn't the right data at the right level. And a lot of the vulnerability and risk assessment data we have comes from regional models. That needs to get downscaled to a level of resolution that can be understood, implemented, funded, and then maintained. That's the issue, right? The applicability and the resolution of this information and data. Number 3 is to identify the appropriate decision-making tools to support the mainstreaming of the nature-based solutions. And again, this is just going exactly what I meant. So the evidence and the data to existing tools. But we need mechanisms and processes with which to harness that and use that in real time. 4th, to the engagement of comprehensive range of stakeholders. I love the opening comments. This is a massive effort of group collaboration. Has to be done in collaboration. But that's not easy. I think a lot of people talk about collaboration. I refer to that as little c collaboration. We need to start doing big C collaboration. We're deeply understanding our different perspectives, the tensions between the trade-offs of these decisions, and how to then effectively move forward in real time. And when you get down again to the local context, policy and politics are messy, and they're slow. They're usually strong as a result of that engagement, but now we need to go fast while still not leaving anybody behind in that conversation. It's gonna require a new level of listening and a new level of compromise. Last but not least is developing a multi-hazard criteria to measure progress and performance. So as I just mentioned, we're gonna get a lot of this wrong, and that's okay. We need to lean forward into failure. We have to understand what worked, what didn't work, have the processes and tools in real time to look at how effective they were and how we can evolve this. If you just look at standards and codes as an example, which most infrastructure is based on, it takes on average 3 to 7 years to create a new standard, and another 5 to 10 years to actually get it penetrated into the marketplace. Well, if we're saying we have 10 years to do this, waiting for new standards to come out clearly won't work. So you've got to use it based on guidance, principle, best practice, and rapidly exchanging ideas of what did and didn't work in order to make that happen. So I'll conclude my remarks there. Can't wait to hear from everybody else, and looking forward to the Q&A with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Thank you so much for talking about the context of NBS from a governance of resilience perspective, and for drawing out those 4 points. Sets us out really well for the rest of the session. I'm now going to hand over to Emily, who's the Vice President of Ocean Science and Innovation at Conservation International, and she'll be talking to us about a business case for investing into nature-based green-grey infrastructure.
Thank you so much. So it's a great pleasure to be here, and I thank the organizers for inviting us to share. I sort of feel like I sort of follow along well from what Seth just was discussing as to how we need to make this real on the ground, and how we have to show that these solutions are not only needed, but they're completely practical and realistic today. And so Conservation International launched a program 3 years ago now, really looking at mainstreaming what we call green-grey infrastructure. How do we combine green infrastructure with more conventional or grey approaches? And I'm going to share with you today just one example from that program where we've done an economic analysis that shows that the green-grey solution, I'll give you the moral at the end, at the beginning, the green-grey solution is significantly cheaper than the more conventional approach that's being proposed, and in fact also has on top of that numerous additional benefits that come with it being green infrastructure. So the example that I wanted to talk about today is from the north coast of Colombia, a place called Ciénaga Grande, which is the largest mangrove area in the coast of Colombia. And here we are, we got the photo. This area on the north coast of Colombia, on the right-hand side is the very large mangrove area, but in the 1950s, an elevated highway was built, and you can see that there as it runs along the coastline. And by building that highway, the natural exchange between the ocean and the mangroves was completely cut off. Then in addition, in about the 1970s, you can't quite see here, but there were dikes built along the natural water flow that is at the eastern end of the mangroves there. And so by the 1995, over 50% of the original mangrove cover was lost. And since then, in that last 25 years, we've even lost even more. And now this has caused numerous cases of eutrophication, deterioration of the fisheries, which the local communities are subsistence fishers and so are completely dependent upon. Now currently on the books, it is proposed that this roadway should be refurbished and expanded. And the original proposal for this was really just a very boring grey conventional widening of 42 kilometres of this road that goes along on this elevated embankment along the coast. So we have proposed instead that they build an elevated roadway that will restore that natural exchange between the coast and the mangrove systems. We estimate that if we do that restoration of the waterways due to putting the elevated roadway in there, that we'll get at least half of the mangroves back. And with that, so we developed with our partner Autocase a triple bottom line cost benefit analysis of this second green-grey approach that we're proposing, which included analysing all the social and environmental benefits of doing that. Clearly, if we bring back half the mangroves, we'll have a more productive fishery, we'll increase biodiversity. There's other benefits that are very tangible, such as reducing wildlife interference with the roadway, etc., etc. And even without all those benefits, the capital and operations cost of putting the elevated roadway in, instead of this replacement that's proposed, is over $300 million less than the conventional approach that's currently proposed. So this really speaks to Seth's argument that these solutions, we're just not thinking of them, and that when we actually look at what's practical, the nature-based solution, or in this case a green-grey solution, is actually more cost-effective and produces much higher levels of resilience for the whole community. And this, even our calculations, didn't even include the carbon value associated with the mangroves that will be restored during this process. So there's not just climate adaptation value, but real, genuine climate mitigation value to this proposal as well. So with that, I'll pass over to my next panelist, but I do want to thank our partners in Colombia, the government agencies of Envomar, Unananes, Tres La Perla. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Emily. That's wonderful to see and hear about. And in continuation of that thread, I'm going to hand over to Sven now, who's going to present another example. And we're going to start with a video, and then he'll be speaking.
Yeah, thanks very much for the opportunity to contribute to this important session. Indeed, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite coastal defense projects, an inclusive nature-based solution for what Seth indeed calls an unfit grey piece of infrastructure in the Dutch coastline. So yeah, let's please start the video.
At Van Oord, we're proud to be able to deliver solutions that protect people from the dangers of sea level rise and at the same time maximise the benefits for local communities, nature and economies. One example is the Honsbosch and Pettemer Sea Defence Project in the Netherlands. The innovative project design not only protects the coast, but also created space for nature conservation and leisure activities.
We are at the moment in Holland. We are here between Kamperduin and Petten. And we are here at the so-said weak link in the coastal defense of the Netherlands. Weak link is a dike, and this dike cannot be raised anymore. The solution is a new design. We have built here dunes and beaches and a foreshore in which in total 36 million cubic meters of sand is used. The project is not only for coastal defense, it's also building with nature. Building with nature is that instead of using concrete and asphalt constructions to raise a dike like behind me, we protect the coastal shore with extra sand, and by doing that we create areas for nature, areas for recreation. So in this contract, which is approximately 6 kilometers long, we create 3 kilometers of nature area, and on the other end, for both villages on either side, 1.5 kilometer of recreation area.
Examples of newly created recreation are beach bars and surf pavilions, a play pool for children, a panorama dune, a lagoon, a birdwatch point, and bicycle and footpaths along the dunes. Many ideas originated from proactive stakeholder engagement and involving local communities. The Hans Bosch and Petimer Sea Defence Project is a successful example of the Building with Nature principle, combining the development of new nature ecosystems with coastal protection, providing safety and prosperity for local communities.
So there was this weak link, this ugly dike, and the height had to be raised. But the villagers did not want a higher dike. So through an inclusive public-private partnership with lots of engagement of all sorts of stakeholders, quite an innovative nature-based design was come up. And well, as you saw, that nature-based design included new nature. The wet dunes there. It included also recreation areas for tourists and locals. And it was still designed to withstand the 1 in 10,000 year storm surge. And so recently the International Institute for Sustainable Development did an asset valuation of the project. And they concluded that the total benefits of this project were much higher than the grey solution that was originally envisaged. They actually estimated the extra value to be around 100 million from particular revenues from tourism and recreation. Yep, and the additional thing was indeed, as I heard before here also, the construction was also cheaper. Yeah, despite a bit higher maintenance, the construction was less costly. So similar situation there. So yeah, the conclusion of the evaluation was that sand dunes do more for less. So it is therefore important when in project design that all possible benefits are considered, and particularly with nature-based benefits, nature-based infrastructure. Yeah, this is another evidence that nature-based is more attractive than grey infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sven, for that video and the presentation and the pitch that we can do it and we can do it better and more cost effectively. That draws me to the next panelist, Mr. Unnikrishnan Nair, who's the head of climate change at Commonwealth Secretariat. He's going to talk to us about capacity enhancement and financing for NBS.
Hello. Okay. Good morning, good morning, fellow panelists. It's nice to hear those practical examples. So I'm coming from the Commonwealth. We have 54 member nations in the group, from the smallest like Nauru and Tuvalu to the biggest like India. So we are contextualizing this in the context of density of population, the variability of resources, the resource demand, and of course around the economic aspects on how to take nature-based solutions forward and financing. The Commonwealth in 2015, in the Commonwealth Heads of the Government meeting in Malta, gave a mandate to the Secretariat to support the member countries in access to finance, access to climate finance, which is basically what we call the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub. So since 2015, we've been like supporting member countries in access to finance. And so over the years, so basically I contextualized my inputs into 5 major areas, looking at what the white paper was talking about. So I think one of the main aspect is how do we ensure country ownership in mainstreaming these solutions. So basically the Commonwealth, we do have what we call the Commonwealth Blue Charter Initiative, which is basically again an agreement between the member countries to support the ocean initiatives, as well as we have the Commonwealth Living Lands Charter, which is proposed to be launched in 2022 CHOGM. So these are country commitments basically, and I think these are better platforms to integrate the nature-based solutions as an aspect that need to be considered while moving forward. Because when you look at land, biodiversity and climate change, so there are a lot of interconnectivities, and looking at countries like Bangladesh, India, Maldives, so basically it's not that easy to provide solutions and to also implement those solutions at scale. So our struggle is basically, as Climate Finance Access Hub, to work with member countries and see some of these projects can work at scale and work sustainably. So currently we have almost implemented around 44.5 million worth of projects, US dollar worth of projects for our small states. And of course we have a very robust pipeline of around 762 million worth of projects. And I'm not telling like all of these are classical nature-based solution projects, but definitely a lot are on ecosystem-based adaptations, and of course taking into consideration the various realms of biodiversity and natural resources. The second point that I would like to allude is the costing of resilience. So we did the climate public expenditure and institutional review for some of the member countries in the African as well as in the Caribbean region, so which gave us a clear estimate that as you rightly said, the cost of green and grey inputs sometimes are cheaper, which is basically not seen in the word go, but we need evidences for that. So we are in the process of doing this kind of analysis with the likes of the World Bank and other members in this area, which are of who are having past experience to generate that evidence, which ideally will make countries go with us. And then of course financial instruments. So we need to have different financial instruments to look at nature-based solutions. So for example, grant alone or grant to blended financing, or financing which probably could secure livelihoods at the same time protect nature. So I think devising financial instruments is going to be crucial, because we cannot go with the kind of run-of-the-mill methodology for when we deal with nature-based solutions, because it's sometimes cheap, but at times it adds a bit of cost also. So the additionality part is still questionable. And the fourth point is around knowledge management. So the Climate Finance Access Hub works with the hub and spokes model. So we have the hub located in Mauritius with around 16 member countries where our advisors are being embedded with the ministries. So the hub and spokes model is an ideal example where we exchange knowledge and also learn from each other and replicate these models. And definitely around capacity building and maintain the capacity enhancement of the government officials around this, because there's still a lot of confusion among the member countries in terms of what the nature-based solution entails, and especially around financing. So we have an event today in the Blue Zone in the Stanford Loo at 4:30, where 7 member country ministers are talking about nature-based solution and financing at our Blue Zone side event. So I'll invite all of you to be there. I think it's a great continuation of this discussion. So I'll maybe stop here and probably we'll go into the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for that invitation. I shall take it up. Thanks so much. Before we go into the round of questions, we're going to get to watch the video, which we were supposed to watch 15 minutes back. Thank you.
Infrastructure systems around the globe are increasingly at risk from a range of natural hazards and long-term climate change. These systems protect, provide, and connect our societies. As a result, the consequences of failure can be significant.
If infrastructure does not withstand extreme events, then evacuation of people in disasters get affected. When infrastructure collapses, then all the livelihood systems get affected.
Significant investment is planned in infrastructure in the next decade globally. This is partly a response to the economic recovery as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic, but also the increasing urgency to decarbonize our infrastructure systems. Resources must be invested wisely to achieve high-quality infrastructure systems and services. Strengthening governance systems will ensure that infrastructure is of high quality, is sustainable over the long term, and is resilient to uncertain and emerging hazards and risks. The Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure and the Resilience Shift are collaborating to advance the debate on where opportunities exist to improve infrastructure governance. Through extensive literature review and engagement with governments and infrastructure practitioners around the globe, 7 key themes have emerged where opportunities exist to improve infrastructure governance to support the development of resilient systems.
O Ministério da Infraestrutura tem como uma de suas diretrizes socioambientais promover a inserção da mudança do clima na infraestrutura de transportes. A governança de uma iniciativa inovadora como essa requer cooperação e coordenação entre as partes interessadas, cujos valores e prioridades devem estar alinhados.
More recently, efforts have been made to integrate built infrastructure with nature-based solutions in order to sustain and restore valuable ecosystem functions and services. We have an opportunity to change the governance of our infrastructure for the better. This will ensure that these systems are resilient and provide significant benefits for both today's and future society.
Now is the time to act. We urgently need to improve the governance of our infrastructure systems. Governance is fundamental to our infrastructure systems, as efficiency and effectiveness of infrastructure can only be achieved through strong institutions and policies that ensure transparency and accountability.
Well, the QR code went faster than you could scan it. But it'll be back up, and it's also available here. Thank you. To the questions, since we are behind schedule, I'm going to do one round of questions and then open it to the audience. And then if there aren't, then I have plenty more to ask. First, Emily, what do you think are the biggest opportunities to invest in green, grey, climate adaptation solutions? And how do we leverage on them for resilience?
So I think we've seen already today a number of these coastal examples of coastal resilience being, I think, some of the places we've seen the first investments in building resilience with sort of integrated or hybrid green-grey solutions. I do think the overarching biggest issue we have, though, is awareness in the construction and engineering communities that these solutions are not only viable, but they're often more economic, and that that they're very feasible. And so I actually think that the single biggest opportunity is to increase awareness either through education or through capacity building in highly vulnerable regions amongst sort of more non-traditional communities to think about this.
Thank you. That links quite interestingly with what Unikrishnan was talking about, capacity building and financing and reaching out, and the initiative that we have on Infrastructure for Resilient Island States recently launched just earlier this week, which is focused on SIDS and their infrastructure solutions, being resilient and adaptive. Seth, what are the main barriers for wider adoption of NBS? What do you think governments, particularly local governments, city governments, can do to support or encourage the use of NBS?
Actually, I agree with what Emily just said. I mean, a lot of it is just lack of awareness, understanding, and a lack of standards and codes. So I think the more we can get information out there, the more we're going to have what good looks like, and show that how this works. And also, as I mentioned, be very clear about what isn't working and how to evolve it. I think that's key. And also, I guess, looking at what the scale of the solution is as well. You know, NBS, it's not a one-size-fits-all. There's different approaches and different processes. You're asking about cities, which is interesting. On the cities, there has been a pretty good uptake in terms of nature-based solutions at cities, urban forests. And some of the other panelists mentioned why that's happening is because cities, one, can own it. So when we talk about governance is a big issue again. You're talking about large nature-based solution infrastructure, coastal, that gets a little trickier. Who's going to own and maintain that? And again, typically you build something and then you're kind of figuring out later what to do with it. We need to start figuring out governance structures up front in NBS. But going back to the city, so it's easier for them to own that. But why cities around the world are now using nature-based solutions like urban forest canopies is because they're seeing the effect of the heating and cooling on their buildings, the increased air quality, increase in property value because of green space and access, and overall increased health and happiness of their citizens. So nobody would have said any of that maybe before 10, 15 years ago, and we would have laughed at doing an urban forest. And can you actually have enough? Now, there's enough data, there's enough additional co-benefits of the value of that cities are beginning to do it all over the world. I think we're going to start seeing that on the larger scale NBS solutions after we start hitting kind of critical mass of the types of projects, what the benefits were, and then we can start adding in to your point and the point you made too about mangroves. It didn't even take into the carbon sink into account, and it was still $300 million cheaper. If you start adding up all of these benefits and switching, I think, but from a mentality of thinking about infrastructure as an output and start thinking about infrastructure as an outcome, and it's not, a bridge is not a bridge is connecting a supply chain, a bridge is connecting two different communities. You start thinking about that, you're going to come up to a radically different approach to how you're working on infrastructure. And what I'm really excited about NBS is I think NBS, nature-based solutions, are going to shed a light on that shift into thinking about outcomes in a much more tangible way than traditional infrastructure projects.
Powerful. Thank you. That's very interesting. And so Sven, if to take that trend forward, and particularly given the work that Vanod has been doing, what do you think needs to be done to increase? I mean, we've heard of it, but from your perspective, what do you think needs to be done to increase the uptake of NBS solutions, integrated green gray infrastructure, as a common practice, particularly for the most vulnerable countries and islands?
Yeah, so we already heard that education awareness is very important. So I think we need, it's Youth Days today, so perhaps we need particularly put hope at the youngsters to educate them and to teach them also about the value of nature-based solutions. But I think the main thing to stimulate nature-based solutions is for governments, project sponsors, to actually ask for building with nature, ask for it. And by doing that, I think there's two main benefits. That is, in the environmental social impact assessment, then more options will be considered already upfront. So that's that's not a showstopper later on in life, in the project life. And secondly, by asking for it, you will unleash the innovation and the creativity of the design consultants, of the contractors, to actually put in alternative approaches. So yeah, again, always ask for nature-based solutions. That will no doubtedly reveal additional benefits, and that way I think we can actually build a better and a more resilient future together.
I think I'm increasingly hearing the need to also probably bring in academic learning and curriculum for NBS and infrastructure. That's very interesting. I mean, that's another thread of thought to take forward. But unrelated to that, and coming to Udni, if I can ask you, I mean, based on the work that you've been doing at the Commonwealth Finance Hub, Access Hub, what are you learning about the challenges of financing NBS?
I think it's a most difficult and most important question. There are reasons why it's challenging, because traditionally governments, the way natural resources are managed, I think there's a way in which it's managed. And so when you go for integrating solutions, especially like if you look at the forest sector as such, like if you go to the forest departments of the subnational departments of forest management, it's by and large conservation centric actually. So the moment it's conservation centric, any solution in the perimeters is not going to be linked to a kind of a livelihood linked or beneficial process actually. So that leads us to a block. For example, look at watershed based management, which is one of the classical cases of nature based solutions. But your ridge areas are always in the forest zones and you cannot touch them. So then you treat the rest of the area. So basically what you're doing, you're converting a common property to a domestic or a restricted property actually. So that's wrong. So in the name of, so you call it nature-based solution, but actually when you go and implement it in the ground, the way it's implemented, it results in a kind of diametrically opposite outcome. So that's basically a governance issue. That's basically a management issue in the country. So this integrated solution of 2 departments or 3 departments or 4 departments working together is the biggest difficulty in because when we write proposals to bring them to the table to agree, because these are silos, these are separate what do you call terrains or territories, which probably, because water, like if you look at water and if you look at the irrigation department, the drinking water department, it's the same aquifer, but the left and the right hand generally don't coordinate, because then how will you ensure nature-based solutions and projects? Then you say, then the straightforward answer, work with the Department of Irrigation and get the project done. But the issue remains with the irrigation department because the drawing rights are more there and the management is a bit weak there because of populist measures. So I'm just like talking, these are very, very practical difficulties that we face when we develop subnational proposals. And I think somebody talked about decentralized proposals. That's even, I think, a better approach, because now that there is a lot of decentralized management that is being promoted by government, if you look at Latin America, if you look at the Asian region. So I think those areas, communities do know exactly what they want over a period of time, actually. So the case of mangroves connecting the ocean, because we know the interlinkages that are required, but when you have a dike in between, then obviously that's going to block this. But the dike is being constructed by the infrastructure department, who has no clue about what's the added value of having a mangrove, actually. So project development process, when you sit down to do this in a country, that's what we. So as a solution, what we tried doing in the Pacific, we did in Fiji and Solomon Islands recently, is to do what we call a right shop approach, where we made the ministries sit down and write proposals and then understand the difficulties and see what are the good practices and where they could they're hitting roadblocks. And then we're projecting them and bringing that back to the management to say, or the senior government, to say that this is what is needed, basically. So there is a slight bit of momentum there. But as I said, nature-based solutions need breaking barriers, getting into connecting between multiple sectors, and precisely that's what we are trying to do today, with the ministers going to talk that they would like to do it for some of the sectors, actually. Yeah, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from any of you? There, 1, 2, 3. So, since I saw your hand first, I'm gonna invite you, second and third, please.
Yeah, my name is Martin Barito. I work with the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub. Uni Krishna is my colleague. And I haven't seen the white paper, but I want to talk about, or want to know more about the principles and guidelines for nature-based solutions. And I'm saying that based on my wealth of knowledge and experience working with nature-based solutions myself. And I also want to reflect on one of the projects we're doing with the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub in the island of Antigua and Barbuda. We were looking at procurement, regional procurement standard for sustainable construction materials, and reflecting on the white paper. Nature-based solution is good, but the source of what we use in must be sustainable as well. So this is very important. I did a lot of work also in marine and coastal area using nature-based solutions, and oftentimes we want to go in and put in good practices, you know, at the expense of traditional knowledge, human rights, and practices. So how much we respect those things as well. So I just wanted to ensure that, you know, and to get that white paper to know, or to talk to those things, those principles and standards in the white paper. Yeah.
Maybe, if I'm just allowed to add on to that, because yeah.
Just to.
Yeah. So I think that's a very practical, again, a pertinent question in terms of defining this in multiple sectors. Like for example, green. It amounts to green building, like when you do for urban or rural housing in massive scales. How do you go for green buildings, actually, or the green parameters within the building, which are basically pretty much nature oriented, actually. So we always see that the financial sector is not in tune with that, and that's one one example. So there are many examples like that. So in terms of these standards, obviously I think that has to be done with multiple sectors to have an impact actually. Yeah.
I'll be really quick. Just two things to share that might be of interest. There's another large project that Resilient Shift has been working on with a host of partners. We're releasing it next week. It's called Infrastructure Pathways. The website is already up. You can check it out. As we're talking about this issue of what are the standards, what's the guidance, there's kind of like a twofold juxtaposition going on right now. One, there isn't enough, and in some cases, there's this complete flood of new guidance. So it's confusing the marketplace. Which one do I use? Why do I use it? So Infrastructure Pathways looks at the entire value chain of infrastructure from procurement all the way for end of life. And we've done landscape analysis around the world, identified and categorized all the standards and codes that are out there. So if somebody needs to do something in a particular context, in a specific sector, you can quickly find it. And it's a living, usable website. So that might be of interest. And the second thing, I've been speaking a lot with the global standards community. One of the largest American Society for Civil Engineers is just spending 6 years to make my other point about how long it takes. But they have just released a new standard on sustainable and resilient infrastructure. They released it 3 months ago. And again, it's one of the first of its kind and pretty comprehensive. So if you haven't seen that, I'd check it out.
Yeah, so as Van Noord, we are obviously working on the boundary of land and water. And there I can recommend the book Building with Nature that has been issued by the EcoShape Foundation. Lots of organizations and companies have contributed to that. And it describes a lot of concepts for nature-based solutions that will inspire, but also 6 principles that will really help in how we go about it.
I think my only response is, I think you're speaking to all the very important issues of working with Indigenous communities, local communities. And I think this is where we've been talking about the need for the engineering community to bring its expertise to these solutions. But the conservation community has, over the last few decades, learnt to work with our colleagues and friends from the Indigenous and local communities, and how conservation restoration projects are only effective if they engage local communities. And I think that's the expertise that is essential to be brought from the conservation and natural resource management community that we have expertise and knowledge on to bring to this particular new set of solutions.
Thank you. My name is Joan Brooke. I represent PIANC. I'll take this off, which is the World Association of Waterborne Transport Infrastructure. And my day job, I work with the ports industry. And my question for the panel actually very much follows on from your last comment there, but taking it a little bit further, is that sometimes I wonder if we actually put too much emphasis on biodiversity. And the reason I say that is that within my own organisation, with my day job hat on, we talk a lot about invasive non-native species. And as soon as you talk to somebody about invasive non-native species, they say that it's a biodiversity issue. It's presented as a biodiversity risk. When we then say, well, actually, okay, it's a biodiversity risk, but it's actually a business risk. Because these species foul infrastructure, they smother, they burrow, they bore, they cause damage, an impact on operations. And then it's like, oh, well, maybe we do need to take some measures. And those measures are the same measures that we would take to protect and enhance biodiversity. But the perception is different. The perception is one of business and in nature-based solutions, kind of like the community. And I do wonder whether by putting less emphasis on the biodiversity per se, and more emphasis on the fish nursery, on the water quality treatment, on the natural buffer that we get from mangroves and so on, and actually looking at those losses, if we go sometimes with a conventional engineering solution, and costing that inaction on nature as part of the cost of the grey infrastructure, if we can get that kind of thinking where where it's a presentational thing, it's a perception thing. Biodiversity benefits as a byproduct. It's not the be all and end all, but it does benefit in the same way. But the people that we're talking to then have a different perception of what it is we're trying to communicate, what it is, the message we're trying to give. And I think that the ecosystem service argument, taking it, stripping up, leaving aside the biodiversity benefits, but taking it down to the basic gains or losses with some of the communities that depend on mangroves for their protection for their fish, for the fish nursery and so on. I think that issue of perception, we all within the community we get very excited about biodiversity benefits, but that doesn't work for everybody. And I think how we present these things, in addition to all the other things we've said, but how we present these arguments in the first instance is really important.
So I think the succinct answer to that is yes. But just to sort of be a bit more elaborate, I mean, I think it's all about audience, right? And so I think finding the right way, so mangroves, my personal favorite ecosystem, are the most super ecosystem because they have so many of these important values. And I think that depending on who you're talking to, whichever one of those values is the one that you need to talk to. So if I'm talking to a local community, the coastal protection value, the fisheries value is the one that's important. If I'm here at this meeting, it might be the carbon value that's the most important that I'm talking about. And so, and in sort of other communities, it is the biodiversity value. That is the most important value. So I think understanding that there are all these multiple values, that we should value them all, and that not being offended when your favorite is not somebody else's favorite, I think is key.
But yeah, I think I at some point agree with the because in the name of biodiversity, if the economics is impacted, I think we have many such examples. Because when a what do you call protected species comes to a forest land, because I've seen it in many communities. The communities are, because in the name of the faunal biodiversity or the protection of that animal, the whole community is shifted from the forest, or the whole community is made to reduce their dependence on the forest actually. So, but the conflict starts from there. And then the participation of the communities in dealing with a comprehensive solution there is lost. So I think there is a point, and obviously I think in these nature-based solutions, that's the kind of difficult chord. Basically, when you develop solutions, how can it be economically viable, environmentally friendly, and socially acceptable?
Not an easy job, but do it. Last question.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Great panel, great discussion. So to me, it's clear that a conservation company needs the skills and the knowledge of an engineering firm to deliver a green-gray infrastructure, and vice versa. An engineering company may need the knowledge and the state-of-the-art science from a conservation company. So it's been touched before already. I just wanted for you to elaborate more how these two, on paper, different set of different communities talk to each other and learn to each other, making sure that moving forward, the latest science and considerations are integrated into the standards for construction and engineering moving forward.
I'll go. I think there's a couple of responses, so I'll try to go quick. I love the question. My personal take on that is I think we need to focus on the science part of it. I've done a lot of work in the city space, in the urban space, for a couple of decades. And what's fascinating is you look at the kind of the evolution of city governance. And back 25 years ago when I started out, cities had a department of the environment that looked after air quality and water quality. Then they started getting into like what we need to be cross-cutting, break down the silos. And you started seeing directors of sustainability, and then entire cross-cutting departments. Then now, maybe 10 years later, you started seeing a chief resilience officer. Now, 5 years ago, you started seeing a chief information officer, because we need chief science officers in cities. You have to have so you can't keep academia over here and bring them in and then toss them out after you want something reviewed. You need to have science increasingly inside policy-making processes to understand and integrate that. They all have engineers already. You don't have science inside. So that would be I think that needs to happen and happen fast.
So I work for one of the large conservation organisations, and this is like one of these confessions. I am an engineer. And I was in the closet for a long time, but and over the last 5 years, we've actually grown a little program of engineers very much focused on these solutions. And with a whole lot of partners, we now have a group called the International Green-Grey Community of Practice, which I'm happy to connect anyone up with, which has multiple engineering companies, conservation communities, etc., coming together to really try and bridge that gap that you're talking about. So I think there's recognition on both sides for that need for the expertise to be shared and spread, and there's communities working towards doing that.
Thank you. And since we are out of time, I'm still going to give, say, 30 seconds to each of you for your closing remarks. I think that will be a nice way, the thought you would want us to leave from here today. Well, unplanned, but I thought that would be interesting given the conversation we've had.
I mean, always ask for nature-based solutions, and then the value will actually, actually demonstrate that there's more and that we can build a better future together.
I can't add to that.
Say it's pretty. It's a pretty good summation. But I don't think there will be a solution to decarbonizing and coming up with a resilient future in the next 15 years, unless nature-based solutions are a major part.
For me, nature-based solution is participatory, and nature-based solution is integrated.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I mean, in a sense, what we're hearing is, that nature-based solutions give us significant absorptive and adaptive capacities. And if you are to achieve resilience, nature-based solutions have to be instrumental to the future of infrastructure solutions, fundamentally. And on that, thank all of you for your time, for your expertise, for sharing your thoughts, both with us here and those who have joined us virtually. And I thank my team who've been instrumental in organizing and curating this on behalf of CDRI. We appreciate your contribution and support, and we look forward to taking the conversation forward as we take our work on NBS and resilient infrastructure ahead. Thank you again.
And thank you for moderating.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.